Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
I have a dream. My poor little children one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
If you haven't been with us for the past 2 weeks, I'm thrilled that you're here today. If you have been with us, I hope you've enjoyed this series. I hope maybe as we were kind of prepping it out and planning, part of my goal was that just within the craziness of the conversation discussion that I felt like was going on within our country, that maybe here on Sunday mornings and throughout your small groups throughout the week, that there could be maybe a small sense of a voice of sanity within all this. And I know that sounds really weird that I would say, like, I hope what I am now talking about to you would be seen as a voice of sanity. I know how crazy that sounds. But that was, in some sense, partially our goal. And today, I'm very excited about what we're going to talk about today, because today we're really going to kind of get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty in terms of what does it look like for Christians to actually engage in politics, in terms of discussion, in terms of process, in terms of all the different components of it. But before we get to that, if you haven't been here the last 2 weeks, I want to catch you up real quickly, and I'll do this really fast. So for the first week of this series, we landed on this point. We said that when you're part of a kingdom that never ends, it changes the importance you give to a kingdom with an expiration date. This understanding that Jesus said that he was going to establish his church and it would endure. And what we've seen is that as empires, as nations, as different kingdoms have risen and fallen, that the church has still stood there, and Jesus' promise has remained true. And then when we see things in that proper perspective, in their proper priority, it changes the importance that we give to the current political discussion and talks about the future of our nation and our country. And one half who say, if this happens, then our nation is going to cease to exist as we know it. And the other group says the exact same thing about the other same group of people. That when we see things in their proper priority, it changes the importance that we give to these kind of cataclysmic discussions that people have. And then last week we got into the politics of Jesus, and we said the politics of Jesus is really simple. People are more important than position. That who you are is more important to me than what you believe. And that if I take any position, view, belief, anything that I have, if my position keeps me from loving you, then I'm the one who's in the wrong. And I'm the one who needs to change. Because the politics of Jesus is incredibly simple. People are more important than position. And so with kind of that stretch, we're kind of getting deeper into this as we go. That is going to bring us to our discussion today, which is about how we engage in the political process. And today, the message is titled The Three Options. And so this is what I want to do. We're going to get to scripture in just a little bit. But I want to kind of bring you up to speed in terms of what conversations look like among more theologians, among Christian academics, especially in terms of how it intersects with politics and how it intersects with, we could say it like this, what do I do as a Christian American? How do I engage in the process? And so I just kind of want to bring to light some of these discussions and some of the viewpoints that are there. Now, in order to do so, these discussions have been going on since the birth of the church. So we're talking like for 2,000 years, Christians have had these conversations as to what does it look like for us to engage in the process. Recently, there's been a development in the discussions that I think is fascinating and hasn't really changed the discussion, but it's helped personify it. It's helped people identify with the different viewpoints a little more. And what they've done is they've taken these three options and they've identified those three options with Lord of the Rings characters. So I'm going to introduce you partially to three Lord of the Rings characters. Now, if Lord of the Rings isn't your thing, if you're not a science fiction fantasy person, first off, we could get you help after the service. That's fine. Someone will be here to pray with you if that's what you need. Okay. But I do want to say that so I'm going to partially explain some of the story from these movies for those of you who are familiar with them, are fans. It'll help you identify with them a little more. But again, if that's not your thing, just like tune out for the geeky parts, okay? And that's okay to say, like tune out for the geeky parts, but make sure you check back in. So like if I'm talking about like Frodo and stuff like that and the One Ring to rule them all, you're okay just going off switch real quick. But make sure you're just still kind of there a little bit so that when we actually get back to the political discussion part, you're there. Cool? Everybody cool with that? Some of you are already off. I said Lord of the Rings, you're like, I'm out. I'm good. So here is the first option. The first option has been titled the Elrond option. In the Lord of the Rings books, movies, whichever one you've gone with, some of you are like, no, thank you, not at all. What has happened is the world that they live in is getting progressively worse. And especially in the first, I'm going to say book because I'm a book guy. Especially in the first book, Elrond is kind of the leader of a group of people. And they take the perspective of, hey, things are bad. Things are getting worse. There's not really any hope in sight. We're out of here. And so they go, hey, we're going to get on boats, we're going to sail over here, and we're going to start a new land, not with you guys, because you guys messed it up. So we're just going to go off and do our thing. And we actually see there's this incredible example in Christian history of the Elrond option, and it has to do with a guy by the name who we know now is Saint Benedict. Now, Saint Benedict lived at the time of the collapse of the Roman Empire. So he's like post-collapse of the Roman Empire as people are just kind of settling in the aftermath of it. And what St. Benedict does is he's heard how bad things were. He kind of lived on the outskirts of the Roman Empire, not really at a hub or a center of civilization. And so he actually visits Rome. And when he went to visit Rome, he was astounded by how horrific everything was. And so I think when people talk about like the collapse of a civilization, we kind of think, oh, that'd be bad, but life would keep going. When St. Benedict went to Rome, what he found is it was incredible the amount of cultural decay that had happened in just a couple short decades. People forgot how to build homes. And so people were just like sprawled out, living on the streets everywhere because people no longer knew how to build homes because that information hadn't been passed on generationally. People forgot how to farm, so people were starving to death. People forgot how to read. And so he goes into the center of Rome, which was like the hub of like elite culture. And he realized like, oh my goodness, it's amazing how quickly society has decayed just because civilization, the government, the structure there had collapsed. And so St. Benedict has an interesting approach to it. He goes and he walks around the city and he goes, nah, I'm good. And he says, I'm going to go off in the woods where no one is. I'm going to go off in the forest and I'm going to start over. And so he does that. He goes and he calls a few people around him and he starts over. And this is what we see kind of the after effects today. You'll see there'll be like Benedictine monks or Benedictine monasteries. And it was actually started in the 6th century with St. Benedict. And what he said is he said, hey, we're going to start over. They would kind of build these fortified little cities, little cultural centers. And they said, hey, anyone, if you want to, you can come live with us. But you have to do exactly what we say to do. You have to believe what we believe. You have to contribute how we say you're going to contribute. Because the world as a whole has just gone in a horrific direction. And so we're going to start over. And so that's what the Elrond option really is. It's this idea of we would withdraw and start over. And what I think is interesting, if I can make this a little more modern day, we see some examples of this. You see, like the Amish is a portion of this. And so there's kind of a spectrum of, there is this idea of an aggressive withdraw and start over, like quite literally, I'm going to get out and I'm going to start over. I think what we see a lot more commonly, especially within Christian cultures, is a passive withdraw and start over, which is more along the lines of political process. No thanks. I'm good. You gonna vote? No. Like Illuminati decided that years ago. I'm perfectly fine. So I think we see like different polls on that. For some of you who go, withdraw, start over, that sounds crazy. You may already be well down that path. But that's the first option, is the Elrond option. The second option that people talked about is the Boromir option. Okay, here's the geeky part real quick. So, Lord of the Rings, movies, books, whichever one you go with. Boromir is the guy who he has kind of been tasked with defending a city which is right at the edge of the battle between good and evil. And things have gotten worse. They are slowly losing ground in the battle, and things are not looking hopeful in the future. And so there's this spot in time where, okay, here's the really geeky part, okay? So Ring of Power comes, created by evil forces as the Ring of Power, and it was used as a weapon of the evil forces to rule the world for evil. And it comes to Boromir, and he goes, oh, but we could use it for good. We could use the weapon of the enemy against him. Okay, that's the end of the geeky part, okay? The rest of you can check back in. And so it's this sense of like, hey, things are bad, but all's not lost. So all we have to do is if we could just seize power and make it right, then we can set things back to how they're meant to be. And so that's the Boromir option. It's the sense of, no, we have sat on the sidelines. We don't want to drift off. We need to take, and this is where it really kind of comes to fruition, we need to take any means necessary to set things right. If our opponents are going to make it ugly, then we get ugly. If our opponents aren't going to play by the rules, then we don't play by the rules either, because you can't win by playing by the rules. And so it's just really the sense of, hey, that's what we need to do. We need to seize power. We need to do whatever we need to do to get back in charge. Good, bad, means, doesn't really matter. And then we can set things right. And it's very much at the end, if we accomplish what's good, then the ends justify the means. And we're perfectly fine. I could talk for a long time right now about the ways in which I see the Boromir option at play in our political process today. But it would be probably reasonably offensive to lots of people. And I need to save the time for I'm going to offend you for like 20 minutes from now, because you only get so many times in a message that you can offend people. And I need to just hold on to that for a little bit later, okay? So that's the Boromir option. The last one is the one that no one really likes, and that is the Gamgee option, referring to Samwise Gamgee. In the books, in the story of The Lord of the Rings, Samwise Gamgee plays a very interesting role. He is a supporting character. He's not a main character. He plays a supporting role. And what he does is he has put himself at the service of his master, Frodo. And he has basically said, whatever you need, I'm here. Your path will become my path. Your agenda will become my agenda. Now, it's not my glory, it's not my fame, it's yours, because you are the main character, but I am here to serve you within your path. And so those are the three big options. We see, first off, we see the Elrond option, which is the sense of withdraw and start over. We see the Boromir option, which is seize power and make it right. And we see the Gamgee option, which is a sense of we play a supporting role. If you don't remember the names of the characters, don't worry about that. You understand the distinction. It's either I'm getting out, I'm taking charge, or I'm going to see how I can help. Those are the three things. Now, I want to, just to be really clear on this, what we're talking about in terms of the three different options, I am speaking of this from a Christian perspective, okay? And I understand every single week we have people here who you don't know what you believe about faith. whether you're at a moment of doubt, you've been kind of pursuing faith for a while, and you kind of maybe reached a crisis point, or you're just entering in and you don't really know exactly where you stand on different stuff. So what we're talking about today is a discussion of how Christians, because you have other options if you don't follow Christ, but how Christians should engage in the political process. And it really comes down to these three different options. And so this is what I want to do, is I want to look at one passage of Scripture that I hope will shed some light as to which of these three options we should pursue. So if you have your Bible with you, we are going to be in Jeremiah chapter 29. Jeremiah chapter 29. And Jeremiah chapter 29 is famous for one verse and one verse only. And this is the famous verse. It's Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11. And it says this: "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future." And so we take that and we put it on T-shirts, and we put it on coffee mugs, and we put it basically everywhere we can. And it's this it's a great verse. There is one problem with this verse, and I'll be kind with this, and then I'll come back around. Okay, so if you're offended, this is not the time I'm going to offend. Okay, right now. So if you're offended now, we're in trouble there. All right. But this verse, the key word that I've got highlighted there is you. So God says, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." But we need to look at who this verse was written to. This is what it says in Jeremiah chapter 29, 4. So just 7 verses before that famous verse. It says, "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. So I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." And God says, okay, let's look at who I'm talking to. Those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Anyone in that group? No? No one? No one was carried from Jerusalem into Babylon in exile? Okay, well then I'm really sorry, but verse 11 wasn't to you either then. I know that's really hard. Oh man. Now, let me be really clear, okay? This is where I'm coming around. I believe God does have plans for you, okay? I really do. I don't mean just verse 11. I think that's a theme throughout Scripture. I think God has plans for you. I think God has plans for you to give you a hope and a future. But this is what is fascinating to me about Jeremiah chapter 29, okay? So I think that promise is true, even though it's not written directly to you. But this is what we do, is we take verse 11, the one we showed a second ago, that famous verse, which is the promise of what God is going to do for a specific group of people who were carried into exile. So we all universally claim that verse. We're like, yeah, absolutely, Jeremiah 29:11. But we miss the calling that God gave the people right before then, which is actually universally applicable. Isn't that interesting? So we all lay hold to the promise and we go, yes, that's mine, I believe it, even though it wasn't directed to us. But right before that verse, what we're going to see in just a second is God gives Christians everywhere a calling of what it looks like to follow him. And for our discussion today, within the political process and within governmental systems, and we just bypass that. I think it's so interesting. We go, yeah, that's true. Yeah, but you're supposed to do this. Nope, that's not to me. It cracks me up. So this is what I want to do, is I want to look at the calling. Now again, 29:11, if you've got that in a mug, drink out of that mug. Enjoy it. Believe it, okay? Because I believe God has plans for you, a hope and a future. But I don't want us to miss the great calling that God gives us, which applies to us today. And so what we find within this is that God's people have been led out of their city. Led is an inaccurate word. They have been taken violently and forcefully out of their city. And they have been carried off to a kingdom that they don't want to be in. So they lost. That's the big thing. They lost the battle. They lost the war. The fight, the effort, everything that they thought was going to happen, all their dreams and hopes for the future. That's why verse 11 is so important, because for them, they thought they had no future because they have lost. And within this incredible and stunning loss, God still gives them a calling. And this is what it looks like. This is picking it up in verse 5. This is God's words to the people in exile. He says, build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there. Do not decrease. Pause right here. I know it sounds like this is nothing. I would just like to say this. I don't think the Elrond option is really applicable. This whole, I'm out, let's start over. Whether it is a conscious I'm out or it's just a passive no thanks. What God says right here, he goes, yeah, you're not in the place you want to be. I understand that. Yeah, things didn't work out how you thought it would work out. He says, build houses, settle down, plant gardens. Like, that takes time. Plant gardens. You're going to be there for a while. Okay? Settle down where you are. And then he says this next part I find stunning. He says, also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. So look at this, okay? Just for a second. The Babylonians are the Israelites' enemy, okay? So that's who Jeremiah is writing to, the Israelites. The Babylonians are the Israelites' enemy. They have prayed for years that God would destroy the Babylonians. They lose the war, and God says, pray for them. And they went, what? Yeah, I'll pray that you'll destroy them, right? Yeah, we'll pray that. They go, no, pray to the Lord for it. But he says this key phrase right at the beginning. We are to seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you. And so we kneel down and go, God, I pray for the peace and prosperity of us, that you would destroy the Babylonians. God goes, no, hang on a second. Seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you. And so I'd like at least for us to entertain this. That the option that is most readily available and obviously the path that is most obviously apparent for us as Christians is the Gamgee option. That we play a supporting role. That the thing that we need to intuitively understand is that we are not the protagonist. We are not the main character in the storyline. This is true throughout Scripture. This is why when we read difficult passages or difficult statements, I always want to clarify to people, and we did this last week, that like, hey, you're not Jesus in the story, okay? Can we be clear? The story's about Jesus. It's not about you. It's not about me. I play a supporting role in the grand narrative that is still unfolding of what God is doing. And any time I take things that aren't about me and I harness them as my own, like plans to prosper and not to harm, anytime I say, no, this is about me, I have lost the plot because I have forgotten which character I play in this story. And so it's to see is maybe if we could say this culturally in the 21st century, maybe our main role in focus isn't to make Christianity the dominant religion politically in our country. Maybe it's different than that. Maybe seeking the peace and prosperity of the nation to which we have been called means approaching it in a different way. I want to show you maybe a few ideas of what that looks like. So, here's the question. How do you seek the city's peace and prosperity? Or we could say it bigger. We could say, how do you seek the nation's peace and prosperity? I want to throw out a few ideas for you. First one, your actions. How do you seek the cities? How do you seek the nations, peace and prosperity? Through your actions. I want to show you a passage out of the book of James. If you are ever feeling good about yourself as a Christian, like you feel like, oh, I really got this all together, read the book of James, okay? You'll feel really, really bad about yourself in no time at all. This is what it says in James chapter 2. He writes this: "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it?" What's the point of all your claims of Christ if you're not actually doing anything? And so one of the most central things that we see that is like primary is that our actions make a difference. That the things that we do, the way we care for those of us who are in this room and those who are maybe never going to darken the door of a church in their lives, it matters. It's significant. Our calling is not to just care for each other. Our calling is not to just care for ourselves. We are to seek the peace and prosperity of the land in which we've been called. And so within that, our actions are how we do that. Second thing, your reputation. Your reputation is how you seek the nation's peace and prosperity. This is Jesus' words. In Matthew 5, he says this: "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot." And this is this kind of like tricky phrase, like, you are the salt of the earth. If it loses its saltiness, what good is it? And I think this could apply to many different things in terms of our witness, in terms of our identity, in terms of who we are individually. But I think one of the most stunning and important ways that we can apply this verse is to see this part of our reputation. Our reputation matters. It makes a difference. It really does. This is what, if I could just be really clear, this is why the way, and I'm not in the right on this, okay? This is just moment of honesty, all right? This is why the primary way that Christians engage in the political process makes me so angry. Because we get so mean. We get so violent in our words. And I just think at the end of the day, like, our reputation matters. It makes a difference. And when I was more youthful and ignorant than I currently am, not clear word, I didn't say when I was youthful and ignorant, when I was more youthful and ignorant. I'm still on the spectrum, don't worry about that. I used to my thought line was like, if you're gonna claim to be a Christian and do this, just keep your mouth shut. Like, don't tell anyone that you follow Jesus. You're making it harder on the rest of us. And I honestly, in some ways, I still do believe that. Now, that is not to neglect the fact that, here, very clear, we all mess up. We all fail. We are all in one way broken. And we all have a desperate need for grace. And I don't say that in a sense of like, we did have a need for grace. We do have a need for grace, okay? We do. And so none of us are perfect. But there is a distinction between just like running through life rampant, only caring about yourself as an individual, and understanding that your reputation does indeed make a difference to the peace and prosperity of the city, of the nation in which you are. Third one, it should be obvious. Your prayers. Your prayers matter. In Philippians 4, the Apostle Paul writes this. He says, "Do not be anxious about anything." Now, it's important that we read that clearly. He does not say, try not to be anxious, if at all possible. No, it's a command. He says, do not be anxious. And so what do you do if you're anxious? Well, he gives the alternative right there. He goes, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. So it's not like a, hey, try not to be anxious if you really can. He goes, if you're anxious, you need to pray. If you're worried, You need to pray. If you're fretting, that's a weird word, you need to pray. That's what you need to do. That's the result. And so what we see is that your prayers matter. Your prayers make a difference. Your prayers not just for things to turn out how you hope they turn out, not for the election to go how you want them to go, not for policies to be passed that you want to be passed. Your prayer for God's hand to be on our nation and our world matter. They make a difference. And then this last one, it doesn't have a verse with it, but I think this should be obvious enough. Your vote. Your vote matters. And I can say it real clear, like your vote is counted. And I know we can like jump into if you're more on like the passive side of the Elrond option, you're like, I'm just going to withdraw and get out, or I'm not going to get involved. I know there's a tendency of you just go electoral college. I mean, right? That's a fun way to start any political discussion. If you don't know what to say, just go electoral college. Am I right? And then you just get to see how anybody actually feels, or if they don't know what's really going on, they'll just be like, yeah, electoral college. But like, I understand we get into that of like, oh, it's just a drop in the bucket. It doesn't make any difference. Honestly, okay, it may not turn the tide nationally, but it may locally. In your engagement in local politics, it matters. In local governments, in things that are passed, it makes a difference. And overall, as that keeps going, as people are more involved, it does. It matters. It's counted. And so we see that. How do we seek the city's peace and prosperity? If this is our call of Christians as to how to engage in politics, I think the four primary ways we do that is through our actions, through our reputation, through our prayers, and through our vote. Now, there's something that I didn't put on the list because it doesn't go on the list, because it can do nothing to seek the city or nation's peace and prosperity. And that is your opinion. If you're wondering where I was waiting for the offending part, right here. This is where we're going. Your opinion, okay? I know it's dark, so I won't know if you walk out, but I just ask you, please, just stay with me for 10 minutes, okay? If our calling, Christian perspective, okay? If you're not a Christian, you don't have to abide by this. You don't have to agree with this, okay? We can talk about it later. But if our calling as Christians is to play a supporting role in seeking the nation's peace and prosperity, then your opinion does not matter. It has no power to do that. Now, I know the tendency is going to be like, yeah, but they believe this. I was like, well, how is your opinion helping? How is your opinion moving anyone forward? Now, I get the pushback is like, well, they believe this and that's wrong, or it's like this thought line, this liberal thought line, or this conservative thought line is going to destroy our nation, and so we have to correct their thoughts. Pause right here, okay? I'll get to the opinion in just a second. We'll talk about that. I want to ask this first. Are you, like, diligently, consciously engaged in your actions, your reputation, your prayers, and your vote? Because if you're not praying for our nation, I don't care what you think, okay? Could I just be really clear on that? I don't care if you're a Christian. If you're not, like, taking actions, focused on, if you're not doing the four other things, how quick we are to jump to just sharing our opinion and completely ignore the first four. Now, let's come back to it, okay? I get it. Sometimes we go, but we need to correct this thought. We need to make sure they believe what's right. And so what do? Is we spout off and we tell other people how wrong they are, and we run that spectrum back and forth. They can't just think differently than us. They've got to be evil or an idiot, okay? There's no in between. And we just go after them. I'd like to offer you some thoughts on that. First one is this. If you really want to shift someone's views, the best thing to do is to help them reflect, not defend. Like, if that is really what you're after, okay? If you really want to correct a thought that you think is wrong, if you want to correct their opinion, which you think is evil or ignorant, I would like to offer a different approach. The best thing you could do, if you attack someone, they will defend their opinion and they will automatically become more entrenched in it. You know what the best way to, like, share your faith with someone It's not to go, you need to follow Jesus because you're going to hell. Not a great approach, okay? You may think it's true. It may be true, okay? We believe it's true. That's why we're here. But not a great approach. And yet we use the same approach with politics. We have these different opinions that people have, and we just go, oh, well, you're wrong because of this and this and this. And then we link to like 4 different articles or something like that. Like, so, you're wrong. And people defend. And they become more entrenched in their opinions. And so the best thing to do is to cause them to reflect, not simply defend, if changing opinions is what you're after. And so we see a way that we do that. That points cause people to defend, questions cause them to reflect. If you just make points over and over again, they're going to become defensive. If you ask them questions, it'll help people reflect. Now, you may disagree with everything that I have said over the last 10 minutes, okay? You may go, I think you're wrong. I think you're off. I think you're ignorant. I think you're evil, okay? It may be somewhere within there. You go, I just think you're completely off in terms of how we do that. Now, I would like to say this. That's perfectly fine, okay? You are entitled to your opinion. But I have some questions for you that I'd like to ask. Here they are. First question is this. When someone, this relates to social media in particular, but you can apply it to conversations. When someone posts a political view different from your own, how does it change your view of them? I'd like to know this. When someone posts a political view or talks about a political view different from your own, but I think it's far more applicable to social media, how does it change your view of them as a person? I'm not even going to ask how does it change your view of the policy or position, because we all know that a Facebook post never changed anyone's mind, okay? We're all very aware of that. I'm just asking, how does it change your view of them? My guess is at best, it causes you to ignore them. At best, it causes you to ignore them. One of my favorite things on social media, I forget who it was, there's been a bunch of memes on it now, but someone posted, I really wish I could have an unfollow until the election button, because then I won't lose all the friends that I will. So how does it change when you see someone post something that you disagree with? How does it change your view of them? Second question is this. Is voicing your opinion, in light of the first question, is voicing your opinion actually making anything better? Or is it just making you feel better? I want to know. Is it changing anything? Or is it just making you feel more emotionally good because you told someone off? Keep in mind, our call, the thing that we can't back away from, okay, is to seek the peace and prosperity of the land to which we've been called. So, is voicing your opinion actually making anything better, or is it just making you feel better? Now that brings me to the third question, and this is the important one. What's the motivation behind damaging a relationship that can change someone's eternity to give an opinion that won't even change their mind? And I ask this very legitimately. If we have an opportunity through the relationships that we have to change heaven and hell for someone, to change the trajectory of their lives for eternity, then why do we damage that in the name of giving an opinion that you know, I know, isn't even going to change their mind? What's the motivation behind that? Why do we do that? Because we keep doing it. Like, I'm not just talking about us here. I'm saying like Christians as a whole, we keep doing it. We keep burning relational bridges that are important, that matter, to give opinions that aren't going to change anything. So what's the motivation behind that? Is it hate? Is it anger? If I'm really honest, Kate, if I'm just going to take a guess, I think it's because we forgot this. I think at some point in time we forgot that we're a part of a kingdom that never ends. And I understand that. It's easy. It's easy to forget it. But what happens is we get so focused on the immediate. We get so focused, not just on what's happening next week or next month or the next day. We get so focused on what's happening right now that we can't see. And I understand we can't see. We can't see the bigger story of what God's doing. And so when things go off a bit, we panic. And our prayers go away. Our actions cease. And our reputation gets thrown in the trash. Because we forget that we're part of a kingdom that never ends. In just a second, we're going to close with a song. And so I want to invite the band to come up. But I want to share a quick story with you that I hope will shed some light on this. It's from another prophet by the name of Elijah. And if you want to look at this later, this isn't going to be on the screen. This is in 1 Kings 19. And the background, the first part of this will give you all the background you need. It says, and the word of the Lord came to Elijah, and it asked, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." What Elijah says in this moment is he says, everything has gone wrong. Things are not how they should be. And then this is what God says. It says, "The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, his cloak over his face. And then God began to speak. So let me say this. Anytime things don't seem to go as we had planned or expected or hoped that they would go, politically, with your family, with your career, anytime things take a turn can't quite make sense of, our tendency is to get up and shout, become angry, and to forget that God works in ways that we do not fully understand or comprehend. At the end of the day, there is someone who holds the world in their hands, and they do not identify with an elephant or a donkey. They identify with the cross. So hear me in this. Trust Him. Trust Him. Not just our country, okay? But wherever you are right now, trust Him. And it's not going to go how you planned. I can promise you that. It's not going to go how you expected. But you know why? Because you're not God. If you could have set out how it was supposed to go, you would be God and you would have no need for a Savior. But I assure you, you do. You need one. So you live part of a kingdom that has seen the rise and fall of empires come and then empires go. And the church is still here. So trust Him.